Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day. Well, it's a lovely summer's day here in the United Kingdom, so I wanted to talk about fun with cocktails, and not the sort that costs you £20 a glass and a headache the following day. I want to share with you an idea that I originally came up with several years ago. Now, these have been made for various people. They hang in bars, they hang at friends' houses, they also hang on my wall at home. So I'm going to show you the first one that I made many years ago now, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. So this is my mojito, completely alcohol free. And this one is made with gemstones and Swarovski for the lovely ice cubes going across the top there. I'm also going to show you the Ruby Woo Woo cocktail. And before I show you some more of the fun ones, I just want to share with you two books. I've got several cocktail books. If you want to learn a little bit more about mixology, and I'm not on commission with this at all, but this book, American Bar by Charles Schumann, is outstanding because it will tell you so much about the individual cocktail and also about what glass to use, how to present it properly, a little bit of history on various cocktails as well. So that's a fabulous book. But if you're into colourful pictures, then this is the Pocket Reference Book of Cocktails. That shows you what your Mai Tai can look like. So you don't actually have to put alcohol in any of your cocktails. You can make them completely fun and fruity and alcohol free. I am partial to a cocktail now and again. If you'd like to pop down to the board, I will just show you a little bit more about the pieces that I've made in the past, and then we can look at some basic techniques for making your very own. So we've got some peridot and emerald on this one, which is a slice of lime and a mint leaf with some lovely ice for your mojito. The Ruby Woo is a little bit more literal, I suppose, because you've got some rubies in there. That's a nice one. That's a favourite one. That hangs on my wall at home. Now, recently I've acquired some absolutely fantastic summer fun collection beads from Jessie James. You can use whatever you fancy. I've got a selection of beads today to work with, but these are some of the pieces that I've been making, and this is what I'm going to show you how to create today. Classic cocktail glass shape. Some of them are more of an Irish coffee glass. The Charles Schumann book is absolutely fantastic for helping you identify the differences. And at the end of today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these cute little earring size or charm size martinis. And just that little beautiful olive in the corner there. So what I'm going to do is just pop these out of the way slightly. And what we're going to do is start by making the glass itself. Now, I think today we're actually going to go for a martini glass shape. I'm going to work with 1mm or 18 gauge wire because these aren't going to be worn as jewellery, so they will be hung on a wall for display, and therefore you don't actually need to have that super heavy wire. You can of course gauge that up or down if you prefer, whatever you want to play with. This is 1mm or 18 gauge. So I've got around about 14 to 15 inches of the 1mm gauge wire, and I'm going to start down at the base of the glass today, so just to the left of the centre. I'm going to start by putting a really sharp bend coming over on the one side, and then I'm going to remove those pliers, straighten that wire at the base of the glass, turn that up so it's slightly easier for me to grab hold of, grip tightly, and then turn the wire back in the opposite direction, so we're making a very fancy paperclip. Going to take a second just to make that base nice and straight. Now you can hammer the frame wire if you want to, but today I'm just going to give that a bit of a munch down with the flat faces of my pliers. Now to make a martini glass, what we're going to do is slightly curve towards the stem of the glass. Try to recreate that in a similar fashion on the other side. You will obviously want to take a little bit more time to get those completely symmetrical. I think we might come a little bit further in. Martini glasses tend to have a reasonable stem, but they're not super chunky. I'm going to do the same on the other side, and then just put a bit of an angle on there to get an upright for that stem. Martini glasses just come out in a straight line, like so. So that's going to come all the way out to the side. I'm going to flip that over and try to recreate that on the other side. The balloon shape of the cocktail glass is quite a nice one because you can have a little bit more fun, a little bit more gentleness with it. But if you want to learn to be a mixologist or a cocktail bartender, then definitely get yourself a couple of books and have a look at the type of things that you can create at home, and then build yourself a bar maybe. So what I'm going to do is make quite a broad cocktail martini glass rather. So I'm going to get that nice shape coming out in a beautiful V, and then once I get to the top of the glass, what I'm going to do is grip very, very firmly with those pliers and draw that wire back down the outside of the glass. We're making a double skinned glass today. Give that a bit of a squeeze and then slightly draw that together, and then it's just a case of replicating the first line that you created. So we're going to use those pliers to help us support that, and then warming that wire with the body to draw that shape back around. Now you will want to take a little bit more time than I am to get that perfect recreation of the inner line. And then a lovely smooth sweep down over the outside of that glass base. Once we've got to the back to the bottom where we started from, I'm going to grip hold of that outer wire really firmly and draw that end all the way back across. Now, if you want to size this up so that it can be visible from across the room, you'll obviously need to work with a much larger quantity of wire. I'm making something which will sit quite nicely on a residential wall. If you are making for a bar, then you will probably want to size this up slightly. So I'm going to flip the design over and try to recreate that on the far side. Popping those pliers in again at around about the height that is equivalent. Might just bring that down ever so slightly, and then draw that angle back around. You can switch grip as many times as you need to make that a similar shape and size. I think that might be a little bit short on that side. If you do think that you can rescue the wire, this is one way that you can do that. Just very, very carefully open and close the pliers until you reduce that bend slightly. Get that straightened back out. Take that up just a little bit, and then go again. You get kind of one opportunity to fix something if you don't get that quite right. So warming the wire first is always key to a good result. So what I'm going to do is put the pliers in near the neck of the martini glass and draw that back on itself, because say you will want to spend a little bit more time trying to recreate that bend a little bit more accurately. I think I've taken that a little bit too late, so just editing that up slightly, drawing the wire around the outside of the base of the glass now, and then again heat of the hand to draw the wire down round the outside. This side we want to be just a little bit lower because these two offcuts will cross over in the base. So once you've lined that up, what you can do is cut away any excess that you find. So I'll cut the first side so that it sits just beneath the base of the glass, and then the second side, make sure that that's nice and straight before I trim away just inside the end of where that would be. So what you can do is add a little bit of interest and detail to the outside of the glass by doing a zigzag of wire in a basket weave design using some lighter gauge. In this instance, I'll probably go for 0.4 or 26mm gauge. So I'm going to grab myself quite a reasonable length of the 26 or 0.4mm gauge wire, and I'm going to show you very quickly how to add that on down the side, which you can then continue to your heart's content. And then after I've filled in the wire on this glass, what I'll do is I'll show you how to make a single skinned glass as well. So I've cut myself some 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire. This is about 18 inches or so. And what I tend to do is start part of the way up one of the sides, and we're just going to do a back and forth or a figure of 8 basket weave. I'm going to trap the excess of wire down one side with my arm to the desk, and I've got a couple of inches to work with at the one end. So what we will do is lay the finer gauge wire over the top of the frame, draw that up between those two tram lines, and I'd like to go for 3 wraps on either side. So that's 1 and 2, and then the third pass, that gives us the impression of 3 wraps just here. So what I'm going to do is put a zigzag line going up the outside of that glass wall to just give a little bit extra dimension and interest. So the fine gauge wire has come up between those two tram lines, and it's now going to go over the top of the inside of that double walled glass, and I'm going to post the end up between those two lines again. Now you can support this with your nail, like so. You've got one wrap, there's the second wrap, and then we're going to come up again through the middle there, down and underneath, and you've got the third appearance of a wrap. So the tail of the wire now comes up again between those two. We're going to support the next section like so, and take the wire around the outside of the lower or outside wall of the glass and wrap 3 times. So that's 1, 2, and a third time. Pull that up into position and give it a squeeze, and you can see already what we're doing is just adding a little bit of interest. Now if I slide this down to the base a little bit, continue all the way up to the top and then cut off, giving yourself a couple of millimeters of extra space near the top, and that will allow us to add more things on later, including lots of beautiful ice cubes bobbing around at the top there, or fruit, or whatever it is you fancy decorating your cocktail glass with. So working down towards the bottom, this is where it becomes just slightly more challenging. So you've got a lot more wire to work with. I'm going to post that down between those two tram lines like so. You just need to chase that all the way through, trying to be as respectful as possible as you can of that wire. And you continue with your zigzag until you get down to the base. So I'm going to run through that quite quickly. We might speed that up. So when we get down to the bottom, it's time to seal everything together. Now you have the choice of whether you want 3 lines going across the bottom, or you can trim one of those away and just have 2. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to show you how to bring all 3 of them together. So all you're really going to do is just continue doing that back and forth figure of 8 weaving, but you're going to do 2 bars of wire. So if I just post the leading edge through there, and I'll show you. I'm going to wrap 3 times around those bottom 2 wires. So that's once. You can post the end through if that's better for you. The wire's a little bit tense because it's seen some action already. So that's the second wrap. Push the leading edge through if you prefer. 3. Squeeze that up all together. Go on the zigzag. And then we're going to wrap just around the upper of those 3 base wires. We're still going in a zigzag fashion, otherwise we'll be here all day. You can fill it completely if you want to, like I have done on this one. Just takes a little extra time. So again, I'm going to push that leading edge through. At the moment I'm wrapping 3 times around this, the most inside of those 3 wires. And then you can either push the end or the leading edge through to get that third wrap. Again on the zigzag, pinching the design together, we're going to tie the lower 2 together. So what you can sometimes find is a way through, and that's what I'm doing here, just pushing the way through with the leading edge of the wire, checking the distance between the zigs and the zags. It's exactly the same technique, it's just a bit more fiddly because you're doing more than 2 wires. So that's 1, 2 and 3. Get that up nice and tight. Make your zag along the surface of the wire there. And then we're going to push the leading edge through and encapsulate just the single wire. So that's 1 and 2. Push that in together. And 3. Now I'm not going to repeat this over and over again. You get the point. You're doing the exact same process of zigzagging. It's just that right now there are 2 wires on one side and 1 on the other. You just want them to be side by side like tram lines, super neat and tidy. So we would just continue until we got to the far end. For this bit I would probably trim away that little extra And just make sure there's no jagged edges there and that it's tied really firmly into position before we move on. So I'm going to do one more little wrap here and then flip it up the correct way so you can see how that will look quite neat and tidy once it's all completed. I'm going to show you now how to make one of the single skin glass frames. And instead of a martini glass, I think this time we're going to go for a classic cocktail glass shape. This is actually slightly too tall. Cocktail glasses should be a little bit shorter. You can tell I've been looking in my little book of cocktail glasses. So I just need to grab myself some wire. I think for a change, I'm going to use some copper that I have in the scrap pot. So this is around about 12 inches, which again is far more than I need. However, it's really good to work with an excess because it means if you change your mind about anything, you can absolutely kind of run things around rather than having to discard a project. So around about the 12 inches or so maybe. And we're just starting slightly to the left of the base in exactly the same way we began with before. We're making the foot of the glass. As I showed you earlier, I made the Mojito was one of the first cocktails that I made. And that was actually in a Collins glass. It should be in a highball, but I didn't know that at the time. I'm quite happy with how it turned out anyway. So there's the base, or the fancy paper clip at the bottom there. Using the heat of my thumb to generate the stem. A little bit of heat into that wire, and you can see the difference in using the silver plated copper and the raw copper. The raw copper is much easier to work. This is quite soft and fluid. So I'm going to make a nice balloon shape for this glass now. Like so, and I think we will make a bit more of a balloon glass, actually, like a gin balloon or something similar to that. So I'm just using the heat and the curvature of my thumbs and fingers to generate that shape. You will obviously want to take a little bit longer to make sure that that's nice and symmetrical and you're happy with all of those angles. Once you've decided how large you want your glass to be, what we're going to do is put a little turn at the top. Now, if I show you the back of this design, that's what we're looking to do, a small loop at the top of the glass. Now, if you were going to drink out of that, that would get very messy. It's not good for drinking out of. What it is good for is attaching our fruit sticks and straws and such things that we want to decorate our cocktails with. So I'm going to grip in my round nose pliers and I'm just going to turn the wire over the top and back on itself. We don't need a vast size of loop. What we can do now is trim away the excess. Always double check that you've got the right piece of wire in hand. Flip the design over to your dominant side. I'm just going to try and get some form of symmetry on this. Draw that wire around when I feel it's ready. And again, check that you are cutting the correct piece of wire before you make that snip. Then what we will need to do is draw this back into position and make sure that we're happy with all of the finer details of the cocktail glass shape. This has actually turned out to be quite a cocktail glass shape anyway, so I'm quite happy with that. Now you can hammer, especially as I'm using the raw copper rather than the silver plated copper. It's very, very fluid. If I was going to make this to sell, I would probably go up a gauge, maybe even to 16 gauge, which is 1.25 equivalent, or a 14 gauge, which is about 1.6mm gauge wire. So you can just play around with that and make sure that you're happy with the form. You could hammer that or just use a heavier gauge of wire. For the next segment, I'm going to utilise some offcuts of wire. They will either be 0.8 gauge, which is 20 gauge, 1mm, which is 18 gauge. It depends what the bead in question will fit on. Usually 1mm or 18 gauge is absolutely fine. So I'm going to show you a couple of choices now, and then for the last part of the demonstration I'll show you how to attach them to the glass. So the key thing is to add some ice floating across the top of your drink, and I think I will use some of my scrap 1mm in silver coloured copper. Silver plated copper, and I just need a nice straight section, and it needs to be about an inch wider than the top of your glass. So I'm just going to cut the wire to length. So this is all from my scrap pot, which is a really delightful usage of scraps. The first thing that we're going to do is attach that on one side of the cocktail glass. So I'm going to make a little not a coil, sorry, a little circle, a little loop at one end. Give that a really firm squeeze. Make sure it's a closed loop. We're squeezing it before we open it, and in that way we can confirm that when we open and close it like a jump ring, it will go back to shape. So I'm just going to open this very, very gently sideways, like so. Pop that into one of those loops and close it back up. It's kind of difficult to show you without getting my fingers in the way, so if I pop that on the other way around, that might be easier. There we go. And then we're just going to close up that loop. As I say, you open and close these loops as if they were jump rings, so with sideways rather than stretching them out. So we're going to add some ice cubes. Now in the Summer Fun Summer Citrus collection, there were these frankly huge, perfectly ice cube like beads. So we're going to have a couple of those, but also from the depths of time, I've got a collection of beautiful ice-like beads. I've also got some fun and fruity beads. So I think maybe, dependent on how much space we have, we'll size that up, see what looks good, see what can fit in the middle. I think we'll get a slice of lemon in the middle there. That will be quite pretty. So I'm going to thread those beads on. When you're working with wire and glass or crystal, you do need to be a little bit careful and respectful so you don't smash the beads. So what we're going to do is look at the loop we made on the one end and try to recreate that on the other end. Now we do need to trim away just a little bit of that wire, like so, before we come back in with the round nose pliers and turn a loop. Now we're trying not to put any pressure on that glass bead at all, so I'm protecting it with my hands as we do that little manoeuvre. So again, opening and closing on that loop as we've made it, to confirm its shape before we just open that up. And then we need to do just a little bit of a wiggle, making sure that our loop is on the correct side of the glass. And we just need to squish that into position. It will go in for you, especially if you're using that raw copper wire. It's nice and soft and it will just kind of bend into position for you. If you have it the right way up, it will anyway. So just going to turn that over. Get that into position and close the loop up. There we go. So with the best one in the world, sometimes it doesn't go on straight, and there you have it. So you've now got your main glass shape, and that will now hold its form because you've tied it together at the top. So if I pop that to one side, we'll work on some drink stick designs. I'll just show a couple that I have in my box over here. And these were literally just using up the last couple of beads from a box and putting some fancy designs on either end. So we've got a drinking straw, we've got some cherries, we've got some, I don't quite know what they are, but I think they're pretty. So we've got some of those, but there's lots of different ways that you can put that all together. And again, I'm going to use some scraps of wire. Here we go. This is 1mm or 18 gauge. I'm going to make sure that that's nice and straight first. And on the one end, what I want to do is make a coil. Now, straws don't usually have coils in the bottom. Sometimes a drink stirrer will have a paddle-like effect, and that's really what I'm going for. The main reason for starting with a coil is that it means I've got a way of connecting it to the glass. So I'm going to give that a squish and a squeeze. Turn that coil around. Doesn't need to be massive. I quite like to complete 2 turns before bringing an upright on that. Let's call it a cocktail stirrer, shall we? So we're putting an upright on the end there, coming away from the coil before we add whatever we fancy. So I think today we're going to add a slice of kiwi down at the bottom. And then from one of my other bead collections, a couple of these very, very fancy, I'm not sure if that one will go on actually, I haven't tried it. Oh, it does, happy days. And then we're going to add a slice of lemon. And I think we might finish with a slightly smaller but absolutely stunning ice cube. So once we've got all the way to the top, and you could measure them, but if the drink stick comes out the top, I think it actually looks quite nice. It's not a great problem if it's larger than your glasses. We're going to be very mindful of whether we've used glass beads, and we're going to come away from the top turn an angle like so, and we're just going to have an almost trifoliate, don't even know if that's the right word if I'm honest with you. We're going to go for one of these. So in with the round nose pliers, generate that lovely circular form to begin with, being very careful of any glass beads that you've used. Give that a squeeze and then bring that back on itself like so. Tighten that up ever so slightly. Again, you're always being mindful of using glass beads, but it works so well in cocktails that I would not hesitate to use them. You just need to be mindful of them. Draw that tail of wire back and over the top. Clench the wire before you bring it back for the third time, making sure you're happy with the positioning of all of these things. Push that until it sits equal and opposite, and then roll the pliers down to generate that last kind of, almost like a clover, I suppose. Now you could run that as a wrapped loop if you wanted to, but there's no weight on it, so I'm just going to trim away, again checking you're on the correct wire before you make that cut. And then we're going to give that end piece a squeeze, making sure that we're not touching any glass beads before we lay it over the surface of our cocktail. All you would then do is wire into position. So I have some scrap 26 gauge or 0.4mm just here. Don't need a huge amount of wire to be able to achieve this. So what I'm going to do is look at my coil, see where I think it will fit best in the glass. And I think probably the coil will look best right down in the bottom. So I'm going to take my scrap of wire and I'm going to wind it 3 or 4 times around the outer edge of that coil. So that's 1 and 2, 3 times. Make sure those coils are nice and tidy before you tie it to the base of your glass. Now you could have it over the top if you really wanted to, but that to me looks like a physical impossibility. So I'm going to wire that onto the rim of the glass with the coiled section sitting in the very centre at the bottom there. You can fiddle around with the position as you desire. So I'm just going to wrap now 3 times around both the coil and the just above the stem of the glass. So that's 1 and 2 and 3 before finishing with 3 wraps. Now you could wrap on the coil itself if you prefer, or you could wrap around the glass. It's a decorative item, it's entirely up to you. Trim that end away. Make sure, as ever, that those ends are tucked. So you do exactly the same thing on the other end there. What I'm going to do is give that a 3rd turn. Make sure the end is tucked away neatly and snip. And that's done all neat and tidy. And then you need to secure that at the top side as well. So if you find that this sits best on one side than on the other, you can either line it up to hook into the loop that we made, or you can take some of your wire and wrap it around the drink stick itself. So I'm going to go for as many as I can fit in there. And I'm not going to wrap from 2 points on this, I'm just going to wrap around the drink stick 4 or 5 times maybe, dependent on what will fit. Get that out of the way. Make sure that those ends are tidied away because they'll come back to haunt you later if you don't, and you might not be in a position to get to them. So sometimes people will rush through and try and get something done quicker and then end up having to undo their work. So I think that it's going to sit quite nicely on the edge of the glass on the left hand side. So I'm just going to take it around the rim of the glass, back onto the drink stick once. Just need to snuggle that in where you can, and twice, and I'm going to take the tail and wrap that into the loop. You're really just looking for wherever you can get an access point supporting this wire. As we made this particular glass out of the raw copper, it's quite soft compared to the silver coloured copper of the same gauge. I think probably the silver coloured copper is half hard and this is dead soft. So I've got myself 3 wraps around that loop. Trim away the end, or alternatively trim away nothing. Give those coils a nice, neat, tidy up, squeeze into position, and that's the basic idea of it. All you would then do is layer up until you have enough for your particular cocktail. The straw that I've made here is very simply channel setting with beautiful rounded spacer beads with some glass sparkle in there. Your other options, exactly the same technique as before. This one's got some very interesting ice going over the top. Maybe it's one of those cocktails that has dry ice coming off it. Haven't quite decided. So there are some of your cocktail ideas. And if you're still with me and you still want to learn how to make the mini martini, I'll show you that now. Very, very quick process. We're going to start with a loop in the centre. Turn your loop, give that a squeeze. Now if you're making these for earrings, you'll want to size them up to make sure they're the same size. I'm not making them as earrings, I'm just demonstrating them to you. So martini glass style. Down to a central stem, out to a little base. Now just to make these a little bit cuter, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of curvature in the bottom of the glass. Now obviously if you had a glass like that, it probably would topple over a little bit too much, but on the earrings design I think it looks kind of cute. Try to get them to be vaguely symmetrical, although on a small scale it shouldn't be too tricky to get those to look quite similar. And then just work on your angles until you have that beautiful martini glass shape. So I'm going to straighten that wire and then trim off the excess just inside where it ends on the other end. And I'm just going to talk you through the last section, which would be to apply some scrap length of 0.4 or 26 gauge. And I'd start by wrapping once or twice around where the loop meets the centre of the upper wire. Take the remainder in one direction and fill. Come along the other side and then just make yourself a little drink stick. And I can do that for you very quickly and wire it on in exactly the same way as we just wired on the large drink sticks. So I'm going to put a small loop on one end, just to make sure that it doesn't catch on hair or anything. Make sure that's nice and straight like a cocktail sword. And I have some lovely, not quite olive colour, but almost olive colour design beads from the Summer Fun collection. And I'm just going to look at how big I need that bottom loop to be. So you would wrap on with the remainder of the wire that you were connecting the top to the side. And then down here at the bottom, we're going to trim away probably just less than 1/4 of an inch. We're going to turn that tail in a lovely loop just over the base of the glass, like so. So you can see you're doing that in one move, attaching it to the glass, wire it to the top, and you've got a lovely martini-inspired charm or earring. I hope you've had as much fun with these as I do. The possibilities are endless. I think I might do a Mai Tai next. Have yourself a beautiful day wherever you are and whatever you're doing, and I look forward to seeing you back here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel again very soon. Please do also join me every other week on my Facebook page for a Facebook Live event where we'll have lots of fun and chat and gossip and a collection of mutually wonderful people. It's a great evening. There will be cabs and beads and all sorts of things available if you're into that kind of thing. I look forward to seeing you there. I will announce that on Facebook. Bye for now.